Imagine dedicating your life to something monumental, only to discover that everything you thought you knew about existence was a carefully constructed lie. The routine was a cage, but it was a comfortable one. For 14 years, the chime of the biolock at Checkpoint Gamma had been the soundtrack to my mornings. I'd nod to the technician, always the same face, though I never remembered her name, and step through the swirling mist of the decontamination chamber. 7 checkpoints, 23 minutes from the landing pad to my console. That's how we measured time at the anomaly vault, deep beneath the churning surface of the North Pacific. My name is Caleb Thorne, and my world was precision data, and the endless, silent hum of the Nexus Stone, my workstation, like the 19 others, was a sterile pod in a vast, domed chamber. Above, simulated daylight filtered through the reinforced ceiling, an unchanging, artificial sun. Below, through meters of reinforced crystal, floated the stone itself. It was immense, roughly the size of a transit bus, a perfectly smooth, obsidian-like obelisk that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating a visual void that seemed to twist the air around it. My specialty was anomalous acoustics. I'd spent countless hours mapping its subtle vibrational patterns, a low, barely perceptible thrum that most new recruits found maddening until they either adapted or transferred out. For me, it was the heartbeat of my existence. Anything interesting from the overnight cycles, Thorne, Leo Vance, my usual console mate, slid into the adjacent station. He was a materials scientist, grounded and practical, a good counterbalance to my own more abstract focus. I shook my head. Same old resonance, Vance, steady as the deep. Predictability was the anomaly vault's creed. The Nexus Stone, discovered millennia ago, encased in glacial ice, had defied every law of physics since its recovery. It was a monument to the unknown, and its constant, unyielding nature was its most profound mystery. Director Silas Blackwood, our stoic, silver-haired overseer, made sure everyone remembered that. No significant fluctuations in the Nexus Stone's metrics, Blackwood announced later during the morning brief, his voice devoid of inflection. Resonance signature remains constant. Thermal output nominal, gravitational field stable, constant, normal. The words were a lullaby, a sedative. I returned to my work, meticulously analyzing spectral data, the familiar thrum of the stone a comforting drone in my ears. At 13:00, I left for the mess hall. Tuesday was always synthetic turkey and broth. I ate quickly, then headed to the communications hub for my weekly video call with Alara. Our booths were soundproofed, isolated pockets of privacy in an otherwise transparent existence. "Hey," Alara said, her face appearing on screen, her warm smile a stark contrast to the sterile blue of the booth. "How's the deep-sea platform?" The lie was a constant wait. Offshore oil rig engineer, our cover story for my endless, isolated rotations. "Same as ever," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "Lots of maintenance. Saw some bioluminescence on the last submersible run. Truth, but a small one, a sliver of real life in a sea of fabrication." Her eyes, however, held a weariness I recognized. "James," she said, her voice dropping, "when you get back we need to talk about us, about the future." The unsaid words hung in the air, the strain, the distance, the truth I couldn't share. My stomach twisted. "Yeah," I managed, "we should." When the call disconnected, I stayed in the booth, the emptiness in my chest a cold echo of the silence. This was the price. They'd warned us. They just hadn't mentioned how much of yourself you'd lose in the process. Back at my station, I plugged in my audio monitors, ready for a long afternoon. Then, at 16:42, I noticed it. A minute shift in the Nexus Stone's acoustic pattern. So subtle most wouldn't register it. A fractional change in the harmonic undertone, a few hertz, barely there. I cross-referenced the acoustic monitoring systems. Nothing flagged. I increased the sensitivity, ran a baseline comparison. There. A 0.03% deviation in the tertiary harmonic. Infinitesimal but real. I logged it, noted the time. Probably nothing. The stone occasionally produced minor anomalies that quickly self-corrected. Still, a prickle of unease ran down my spine. After 14 years of unyielding consistency, this tiny shift felt wrong. I had no idea that this small tremor in the rhythm of my life was just the beginning. I stayed late, monitoring the anomaly, long past my shift's end. The night crew had already taken their places, the vault never truly sleeping. The walk back to my quarters was precisely 9 minutes, a rhythm I had known for years. But tonight, I found myself stopping, listening, that faint, changed hum following me through the sterile corridors. Sleep came slowly, haunted by the decimal points of deviation. Morning arrived with the same artificial dawn, the same oatmeal, the same carefully curated small talk in the mess hall. At 7:43, I began my journey to the console. The security technician at Gamma seemed more alert, or perhaps I was just seeing things differently. When I reached my desk, I stopped dead centered on my otherwise immaculate console was a yellow note. A post-it. We didn't use post-its. The bright square screamed against the muted gray of the workstation. My pulse quickened as I picked it up. 6 words scrawled in blue ink. You must flee, now. See, the handwriting was undeniably mine. The same cramped letters, the distinctive way I crossed mites, but I hadn't written it. I never used post-its. I looked around. No one seemed to notice me or the note. Someone had been in my workstation. Someone who could perfectly mimic my handwriting. Or, I accessed my console, pulling up the security footage from the previous night. The system required my biometric confirmation, a retinal scan, a palm print. The timestamp covered the hours after I'd left. I fast-forwarded through the empty hours, the cleaning staff performing their silent ballet. Then at 2:17 movement, I rewound a man who looked exactly like me. Not similar. Identical. Same jumpsuit, same posture, even the slight nervous twitch I sometimes got in my left hand. My mirror sat at my console, pulled out a yellow post-it pad, wrote something, then peeled it off and placed it precisely where I'd found it. Then my mirror looked directly into the camera. My face, serious, determined. His lips moved, speaking words the camera couldn't capture. The footage continued as Leo Vance entered the frame. He and my mirror spoke for nearly 2 minutes. Leo looked alarmed, his hands gesticulating as if arguing. My mirror handed him something small, a data chip, before stepping back. What happened next made me hit pause, rewind, and play again 3 times. My mirror simply dissolved. One moment he was there, solid. The next, a brief flash of white light, and he was gone. Leo stood alone, staring at the empty space, then frantically pocketed the chip and hurried out of frame. The timestamp read 2:26. I closed the feed, my mind reeling. Impossible. The anomaly vault had the most advanced security on Earth. No one entered without 7 biometric checkpoints, and no one simply vanished. I needed to find Leo. I found him at his usual corner table in the mess hall, stirring his coffee, oblivious. Leo, I said, sliding into the chair opposite him. We need to talk. He looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Morning, Caleb. What's up? I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. Did you come to my workstation last night? Around 2:00. Leo's hand stopped stirring. His expression remained placid. No, Thorne, I was in my quarters after 21:00. Why? I just watched security footage of you talking to someone at my workstation at 2:17. A flicker of something, alarm, recognition, crossed his face, gone in an instant. Must be a system glitch. I didn't leave my quarters. The footage shows you talking to someone who looks exactly like me. He gave you something, a data chip. Leo's eyes darted left, then back to me. He pushed his chair back. I don't know what you're talking about, Caleb. Maybe you need to step away from the console. The long shifts can mess with your head. Leo, I know what I saw. I pulled the yellow note from my pocket. And whoever he was, he left this. Leo glanced at the note. His face had gone pale. I have to get to the lab. Blackwood doesn't like us late for briefing. He stood. Wait. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. I can't help you, Caleb. His voice dropped to a whisper laced with fear. I really can't. I watched him walk away, his shoulders stiff with tension. He was lying. I was certain of it. The morning brief was a blur. Blackwood spoke of maintenance and quotas. I sat there, the yellow note burning a hole in my pocket, my mind racing. By mid-morning, I'd made no progress on my mapping sector. I needed answers. Blackwood was the only one with full system access. I sent a meeting request. Urgent. 20 minutes later. Office 12:30. Blackwood's office was as stark and cold as the man himself. No personal items, just a large facility map behind his chair. "Thorne," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. "What's so urgent, sir? I believe we have a security breach." I placed the yellow note on his desk. "I didn't write this, but it's my handwriting." Blackwood glanced at it, unmoving, and I checked the security footage. It shows someone who looks exactly like me entering the facility last night, writing this note, then disappearing after speaking with Leo Vance. Blackwood's face remained impassive, but his fingers began a slow tap-tap-tap on his desk. "Have you spoken with Vance about this?" "Yes, sir." He denied it, but the footage. Blackwood leaned back. "Thorne, how long have you been at the Deep?" 14 years, sir." "And in that time, have you ever experienced unusual thoughts? Hallucinations, paranoia?" The question blindsided me. "No, sir, never." "The mind is a complex thing, Hughes." He used my last name, a subtle emphasis. "Extended isolation, repetitive work, limited social interaction, they can take a toll, even on the most stable individuals." A chill crept up my spine. "Sir, I'm not imagining this. I have the security footage, which I will review personally." He cut me off. "But I think we should also have Dr. Reed evaluate you, just as a precaution." "A psychiatric evaluation, sir. With all due respect, I'm not. It's standard procedure when personnel report impossible events, Thorne. The Nexus Stone has unusual properties. We've documented cases where prolonged exposure affects perception. Sir, the deviation I logged yesterday was well within normal parameters. 0.03% is statistically insignificant." His tone brooked no argument. "I want you to report to medical at 14:00 for evaluation. Then return to your workstation. If there's been a breach, we'll handle it. If there hasn't—" He let the implication hang in the air. "Yes, sir." I stood. "And Thorne," Blackwood called as I reached the door, "don't discuss this with anyone else." Security protocols, understood. The psych evaluation was brief, clinical. Dr. Evelyn Reed, with her practiced, serene smile, asked standard questions. I answered honestly, except when she asked if I'd experienced any unusual thoughts or perceptions. I said no. Telling her about my mirror would only cement Blackwood's narrative of my instability. She prescribed a mild sedative, suggesting stress-related paranoia, common in long-term deployments. Nothing to worry about. I returned to my workstation, going through the motions, my mind a storm of questions. The yellow note remained in my pocket, its 6 words repeating. "You must flee. Now, see." But flee where? The vault was 200 miles from the nearest landmass. We arrived and departed on scheduled rotorcraft rotations. There was no leaving outside those parameters. The rest of the day passed in a haze of routine. Leo avoided me. Other researchers carried on, oblivious. By the time my shift ended, exhaustion had set in. I skipped dinner and headed straight to my quarters, hoping sleep would clear my head. I didn't take the sedative. I needed to stay alert. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the footage. My mirror's grim expression, the note, the flash of light as he vanished. Leo's denial. Blackwood's dismissal. The low thrum of the Nexus Stone had been a constant background for 14 years. I'd learned to tune it out. But tonight it seemed louder, more insistent. I rolled over, pulling the pillow over my ears. It made no difference. The sound pushed through, vibrating not just in my ears, but somehow inside my head. The 0.03% deviation I'd noticed yesterday had grown. The pitch changed in waves, rising and falling in patterns I'd never heard. I sat up, pressing my hands against my ears. No difference. The sound wasn't external. It felt like it was being created inside my skull. As the minutes stretched into hours, I began to hear something else, layered within the noise. Whispers, too faint to make out words but definitely voices. Multiple voices, speaking together, just below the threshold of understanding. I got up, pacing my small quarters. I tried running the shower, playing music through my earbuds. Nothing helped. The whispers continued, a chorus of unintelligible voices riding the waves of the stone's resonance. By the time my alarm signaled morning, I hadn't slept at all. The voices had kept me company through the night, carrying messages I couldn't quite grasp. As I prepared for another day, one thing became chillingly clear. The Nexus Stone was no longer silent. It was trying to speak. 3 days of whispers left me utterly exhausted. I dragged myself through my morning routine, the voices a constant buzz at the edge of my mind. The yellow note, folded in my pocket, remained a stark reminder. You must flee now. But how? The vault's usual routines offered no comfort. My body ran on fumes. The morning brief passed in a blur. Director Blackwood mentioned minor fluctuations in the harmonic resonance, his tone deliberately casual, well within normal parameters. Minor fluctuations. He'd said the same about my 0.03% deviation. I looked around the room, wondering if anyone else could hear the chorus that had kept me awake for 3 nights. The other researchers looked bored as usual. You all right, Thorne? Dr. Aris Caldwell, the senior theoretical physicist, stood beside my station. His eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, showed genuine concern. Fine, I mumbled. Just tired. Caldwell nodded slowly. The stone's been active lately. Sometimes it affects people differently. Have you noticed anything strange? I kept my voice low. Not personally, but I've been here almost since the beginning. You learn to spot the signs when something's changing. Before I could press him, a junior researcher called him away. The day crawled by. The whispers grew louder, like dozens of people talking just out of hearing range. I skipped dinner. It didn't work. I stayed awake all night, listening to the voices rise and fall, almost forming words before dissolving back into random noise. Sometimes, a single voice would push through the din, still impossible to understand, before blending back into the collective. The next day was a repeat. Work, exhaustion, constant whispers. Leo avoided me, diverting his path whenever I tried to approach. That night, I took the sedative Dr. Reed prescribed. It made everything fuzzy, but it didn't stop the whispers. Instead, they seemed to come from inside my own skull, detached from the stone, trapping me in a horrifying half-sleep. By the 3rd day after finding the note, I barely felt tethered to reality. I walked through the vault like an automaton, my mind consumed by the unintelligible chorus. I was heading back from the testing lab when I saw her. Ilara, standing at the end of the corridor outside the research wing, wearing the same azure sweater she'd worn in our last video call. Her auburn hair shimmered under the artificial lights. She was looking right at me, confused, worried. I stopped, disbelieving. Ilara couldn't be here. The vault was a fortress. No one got in without passing the 7 biometric checkpoints. And yet there she was. Ilara, I called, my voice cracking. She opened her mouth to speak, but before any sound emerged, 2 security officers appeared behind her. They took her arms, gently but firmly, leading her away. Wait, I shouted, breaking into a run. Ilara! She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment before the security team ushered her around a corner and out of sight. I ran after them, but when I turned the corner, the corridor was empty. No Ilara, no security, just the same sterile hallway I'd walked 1,000 times. No, I whispered to the empty air. She was here. I saw her. I ran to the nearest security station, slamming my palm against the communication panel. Security breach in Corridor E. I need Commander Kane immediately. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Commander Thuron Kane in the security office. He was reviewing the surveillance footage from Corridor E. There, I pointed at the screen. The footage showed me walking down the corridor, stopping, then calling out to empty air. There was no Ilara, no security officers. Just me apparently hallucinating in the middle of a secure facility. Thorne, Kane said carefully. There's no one there. That's impossible, I saw her. Ilara, my partner, she was wearing a blue sweater. Security was taking her away. Kane rewound, played it again. Same result, me talking to empty space. Could the footage be altered? I grasped at straws. By whom? Kane countered. And why? Look, Thorne, Director Blackwood mentioned you've been under observation. Long-term deployments can sometimes cause perceptual issues. Not hallucinating, I insisted, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. What was more likely? That Ilara had bypassed all security to appear in the deep, or that my sleep-deprived mind was playing tricks. Kane closed the footage. I'd recommend speaking with Dr. Reed again. In the meantime, I'll increase security sweeps just to be thorough. I nodded, knowing further argument was pointless. As I stood to leave, Kane added, the stone affects people in different ways, Thorne, even those of us who have been here a long time. It was almost word for word what Caldwell had said. The mood had shifted. Researchers huddled in small groups, talking quietly. Conversations stopped when I approached. I caught snippets. Unstable security risk. Happened before. It was clear I was the topic of their concern. I sat at my station, trying to focus, but the screen blurred. The whispers were louder now, more urgent, as if trying to tell me something important. Leo Vance walked past my station without acknowledging me, heading for the central display where the mapping team had gathered. Their voices carried across the quiet room. It's impossible, one said. We've checked the equipment 3 times. Run it again, Leo ordered. We need to be absolutely certain before we report this. I watched them huddle, pointing at data patterns I couldn't see. After 15 minutes they dispersed, looking troubled. Leo remained, staring at the screen. I walked over, curiosity overcoming my weariness. What's going on? Leo jumped, startled. Mapping anomalies, he said after a brief pause. Nothing to worry about. What kind of anomalies? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Particles appearing in 2 locations simultaneously, not just quantum entanglement. We're talking about the same particle occupying 2 distinct points in space-time. He gestured to the screen. See these? They should be impossible. The display showed a 3D model of a section of the stone, certain particles highlighted in red. According to the timestamps, these particles were being recorded in multiple locations at the exact same microsecond. How long has this been happening? I asked. We first noticed it yesterday. It's spreading through the structure. Leo's voice dropped lower. Caleb, this isn't just unusual. It violates fundamental laws of physics. Before I could respond, my workstation alarm chimed a standard alert, signaling a completed analysis. I excused myself and went back to my desk. The screen had changed. Instead of the analysis results, a message filled the display in large, stark text. Time is running out. They know, see. I looked around quickly. No one was watching. The message stayed for exactly 5 seconds before disappearing, replaced by the normal analysis report. My hands were shaking. I pulled up my workstation security video. The timestamp showed activity from just 10 minutes earlier while I'd been talking to Leo. The video showed my mirror sitting at my station, typing furiously. This time he looked different, tired. A healing cut across his left cheek. He finished typing, looked directly at the camera, a grim, serious expression, then stood and walked out of frame. I checked the entry logs for my workstation. According to the system, no one had used my terminal except me. The biometric security had registered no unauthorized attempts. Yet, the video clearly showed someone who looked exactly like me bypassing all security measures. The whispers in my head grew louder, a cacophony of voices, all trying to speak at once. I pressed my hands against my temples. It only got worse. I needed to get away from the research floor to think clearly. I signed out and headed for the residential wing, taking my usual route, but the usual route wasn't there. Where a T-junction should have led to the elevator banks, I found a straight corridor extending farther than I remembered. I stopped, confused. I turned back. The hallway behind me now ended in a door I didn't recognize. I kept walking, looking for familiar landmarks. The vault had a logical layout, concentric rings connected by spokes. I'd walked it with my eyes closed during security drills. But now, nothing matched. A door that should have led to the mess hall opened into a storage room. Corridors stretched, or ended abruptly. Twice, I found myself back at the research floor despite heading in the opposite direction. After 20 minutes of disoriented wandering, I rounded a corner and came face to face with Dr. Aris Caldwell. "Caleb," he asked, surprise in his voice. "What are you doing in Sector C? Your quarters are in E-Wing." "I got lost," I admitted, the words sounding ridiculous. "Everything looks different." Caldwell looked at me for a moment, then pointed ahead. "Come on, I'll walk with you." We walked in silence, Caldwell leading. The layout suddenly made sense again. Within minutes, we stood outside my room. "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. I don't know what happened. It was like the whole place rearranged itself. Caldwell glanced down the empty corridor, then back at me. "Caleb, how long have the whispers been keeping you awake?" I was shocked. I hadn't told anyone about the whispers. Not Dr. Reed, not Blackwood, not even Leo. "How did you?" "I've been here since they first brought the stone to this facility," Caldwell interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen what happens when it starts to communicate." "Communicate?" I echoed. "You mean the whispers are coming from the stone?" Caldwell nodded, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. "It doesn't always choose the same person. Last time it was Reardon Thorne." The name meant nothing to me, but Caldwell said it with significance, as if I should recognize it. "What happened to him?" I asked. Caldwell's eyes darted toward the ceiling, where I knew security cameras monitored every corridor. "Not here. We can't talk here." He pressed something small and hard into my palm. "Tomorrow, when you're ready to know." He walked away before I could respond, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until he disappeared around a corner. I entered my quarters and closed the door, leaning against it as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. The whispers continued, a constant murmur, but something had changed. One voice now rose above the others, still unintelligible but clear, as if speaking directly to me. I opened my hand. It was a small data chip, the kind used for secure file transfers within the facility. My personal terminal, a basic system for approved entertainment, wouldn't accept it. It had a different connector type, older than the current standard. I would need access to an older system. I lay down, the chip clutched in my hand. The voices from the stone waxed and waned. I remembered Ilara's face as security took her away. Had she been real, a hallucination, or something else entirely? As I was finally falling asleep, one whisper broke away from the others, suddenly clear. A woman's voice. Strangely familiar. "Caleb," it said, "find me." I spent the next week in a constant state of nervous exhaustion. The whispers never stopped. Sometimes they'd quiet down to a distant murmur, other times they'd swell to a roar, drowning out my thoughts. Ilara's voice sometimes cut through clearer than the others, with that same chilling phrase, "Find me." But she never said anything more. I hadn't seen her again. The chip Caldwell had given me was useless without an older terminal. I'd scoured the facility for compatible hardware, but most systems had been upgraded years ago. I kept the chip hidden, taped beneath my desk drawer. Sleep came in small, unrefreshing chunks. My work quality plummeted. Mapping errors increased. My focus was shattered. Other researchers kept their distance. Even Leo avoided me, though I sometimes caught him watching me from across the lab with a look I couldn't decipher. The summons came during lunch on the 7th day. A security officer approached my isolated table. "Caleb Thorne, your presence is requested in Conference Room Alpha. Immediately." I followed him through the hallways, which, mercifully, had remained stable since my disorienting experience. The officer said nothing, keeping a careful distance. Conference Room Alpha was the largest meeting space in the facility. 3 men waited inside. Blackwood at the head of the table, Kane standing by the window, Caldwell midway down the table nervously adjusting his glasses. Thorne, Blackwood said, pointing to a chair across from Caldwell. Sit. I took the seat, noticing the folder in front of Blackwood and the tablet Kane held. The polished surface of the conference table showed my tired, strained reflection. Do you know why you're here? Blackwood's tone was carefully neutral. I assume it's about my work performance, I said, among other things. Blackwood opened the folder. In the past 7 days, you've reported seeing impossible things. Accused a colleague of lying about security footage. Claimed your partner somehow bypassed all our systems to appear inside the facility. And gotten lost in hallways you've navigated perfectly for 14 years. Each point landed like a stone. Stated that way, I sounded utterly unstable. Dr. Reed reports you haven't been taking the prescribed medication, Kane added from the window. And security logs show you've been accessing restricted areas during off hours. I looked at Caldwell, whose face gave nothing away. Would you like to explain yourself? Blackwood asked. I took a deep breath. Something's happening with the stone. It started with that sound change I reported, but it's grown into something more. I hear whispers, voices, all the time now. Auditory hallucinations, Kane said flatly. Not hallucinations, I insisted. And I'm not the only one who's noticed changes. The mapping team found particles existing in 2 places at once. That's physically impossible. Blackwood and Kane exchanged a look. And then there's my mirror, I continued, knowing how insane it sounded. He's appeared multiple times on security footage, but somehow gets past all biometric checks. He left me warnings. The facility itself has changed. Hallways rearranging, rooms appearing where they shouldn't be. Caleb, Blackwood's voice softened, which was somehow worse than his usual clipped tone. We've seen this before. Long-term exposure to the stone affects different people in different ways. We have procedures for this. He pushed a small white pill bottle across the table. Dr. Reed has adjusted your medication. This should help with the hallucinations and paranoia. I'm not hallucinating, I said firmly. Check the security footage from my workstation. Check the mapping data. We have, Kane said. There are no unauthorized access events at your station. The mapping anomalies were equipment calibration errors since fixed. They were lying. I'd seen the footage myself. I'd heard Leo discussing the impossibility of their findings. You need help, Thorne, Blackwood continued. We value your 14 years of service, but if you can't maintain your mental stability, we'll have to consider reassignment. Reassignment. I'd never heard of anyone being reassigned from the deep. Once you were here, you stayed. That was the deal. It would be best for everyone, Blackwood said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion but a threat. Anger flared. What happened to Reardon Thorne? The reaction was immediate. Kane stiffened. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Caldwell's hand froze mid-adjustment of his glasses. Who told you that name? Blackwood asked quietly. Does it matter? I countered. Who was he? And what happened to him? Blackwood closed the folder slowly. Reardon Thorne was transferred to another facility 5 years ago. His work here was completed. That's the official story, I said. What's the truth? The room went silent. Kane moved from the window to stand behind Blackwood, a subtle show of united authority. Thorne, Blackwood's voice hardened. You're stepping into dangerous territory. Classifications exist for reasons beyond your clearance level. William, Dr. Caldwell spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly steady. I think we need to tell him. Blackwood turned to Caldwell, his expression darkening. That's not your decision to make. Look at him, Caldwell gestured toward me. The same signs, the same pattern. If we don't step in, we'll lose another one. This discussion is classified, Kane cut in, and Thorne doesn't have the necessary clearance. I do, Caldwell said quietly, and I'm invoking Section 12 of the Research Charter. Blackwood's jaw tightened visibly. Section 12 was rarely mentioned, the rule that allowed senior researchers to share classified information if they believed keeping it secret created a greater risk to the facility or staff. You're making a mistake, Blackwood warned. Maybe, Caldwell admitted. But I've been here longer than anyone in this room. I've watched this happen before. Blackwood and Kane exchanged looks again, some unspoken message passing between them. Fine, Blackwood finally said. Limited disclosure, but it stays in this room. Caldwell nodded and turned to me. Caleb, what you're experiencing isn't unique. The stone has properties we've been tracking for years, but haven't fully included in the general research database. He pulled out his own tablet and slid it across the table. On the screen was a chart titled Spacetime Anomalies, Restricted Access. The graph showed a steady increase in recorded events over the past decade, with a sharp jump in the last 6 months. For years, we've documented reality distortions near the artifact, Caldwell continued. Equipment recording events that haven't happened yet or never happened at all. Impossible physics. And yes, duplications of personnel. I stared at the data, a strange mix of relief and deeper worry. So I'm not hallucinating. Not entirely, Caldwell said carefully. The stone isn't just an artifact from some ancient civilization. It appears to be changing spacetime itself. Theoretically changing, Kane corrected. We have no conclusive evidence. We have plenty of evidence, Caldwell interrupted. We just can't explain it with current scientific models. He turned another page on his tablet, showing footage I recognized immediately. My mirror sitting at my workstation, writing the post-it note. Your security clearance doesn't allow you to access these files, Caleb. That's why when you checked, you only saw what the system was programmed to show you. You knew about this, I asked, looking between the 3 men. You knew I was telling the truth, and you still tried to convince me I was hallucinating. Protocol, Kane said simply. Need-to-know basis. And now I need to know. Caldwell nodded slowly. You're the 4th person to report these specific experiences. First was Keller in 2012, then Matthews in 2015, then Reardon in 2018. What happened to them? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Officially, all 3 requested transfers to other research sites, Blackwood said, his tone carefully neutral. Their departure paperwork is all in order. And unofficially, I pressed. Caldwell removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They vanished. Keller during a routine maintenance cycle, Matthews during a supply delivery, and Reardon during the only power outage in the facility's history. Vanished, the word hung in the air, without a trace, Caldwell confirmed. Their personal things stayed in their quarters. They simply weren't there anymore. And none of you thought this was worth looking into. I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. We looked into it thoroughly, Kane snapped. Every inch of this facility was searched, every piece of footage reviewed, every possible escape route checked. They couldn't have left the deep through any normal means. Then where did they go? Caldwell hesitated, glancing at Blackwood, who gave a small nod. We believe the stone took them, Caldwell said quietly. Or more accurately, that they went into the stone. The statement hung in the air, its impossibility fighting with the conviction in Caldwell's voice. How? I finally asked. We don't know, Caldwell admitted. But in each case, the stone showed increased activity in the days leading up to their disappearance. The same pattern we're seeing now. I thought about the whispers, the changes in the facility, my mirror's warning. Why are you telling me this now? Because, Caldwell said carefully, we need to understand what's happening, and you're our best connection to the phenomenon. Blackwood cleared his throat. What Dr. Caldwell means is that we'd like you to document your experiences in detail, under controlled conditions, with proper monitoring. The clinical language didn't hide what he was really saying. I was no longer just a researcher. I had become a subject of study. And if I refuse, that would be unwise, Kane said flatly. Cooperation is in everyone's best interest. You mean you'll force me to comply? Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. The Nexus Stone is the single most important scientific discovery in human history. Individual preferences don't matter compared to what we might learn. I looked at Caldwell, but his face was blank again. Do I have a choice? I asked. There's always a choice, Thorne, Blackwood said. But only one lets you continue your work here without complications. The threat was clear. I nodded slowly, buying time to think. What do you want me to do? Report any unusual experiences immediately, Blackwood instructed. Submit to daily medical evaluations. Wear monitoring equipment at all times, and take the medication Dr. Reed has prescribed. It won't block the experiences, just help you maintain perspective. In other words, they wanted to keep me functional enough to observe, but drugged enough to control. I thought about the data chip hidden in my quarters, about Reardon and the others who had vanished, about my mirror's warning, "You must flee." "Now, all right," I said, pretending to give in. "I'll cooperate." "Good." Blackwood stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Kane will take you to medical for your first full evaluation. We'll start the monitoring protocol tomorrow." As I got up, I looked down at the shiny conference table. I could see my face in it, tired, stressed, but determined. Then, while everyone else was packing up, something impossible happened. My reflection moved by itself. I froze, completely shocked, while my mirror image looked right at me with an urgent expression. His lips formed words carefully, soundlessly, but clear as day. "Find Reardon Thorn." I looked up quickly to see if the others had noticed, but they were busy. When I looked back at the table, my reflection had returned to normal, copying my movements exactly. "Thorn," Kane called from the door. "Medical is waiting." I nodded and followed, my mind racing. Reardon Thorn hadn't transferred. He hadn't escaped. And according to Caldwell, he hadn't been taken by the stone either. At least, not the way they thought. Reardon Thorn was still here, somewhere in the deep. And somehow, I needed to find him. My search for Reardon Thorn began the morning after my meeting with Blackwood, Kane, and Caldwell. The medication they'd insisted I take made my thoughts fuzzy, but didn't stop the whispers. If anything, the voices seemed more persistent, like they were trying to push through the drugs. The facility's personnel database could be accessed from any terminal with proper clearance. I logged into the system during my scheduled research break, making sure no one watched. According to official records, Reardon Thorn had never worked at the Deep. I ran the search 3 times, trying different spellings and ID parameters. Nothing. According to the system, he simply didn't exist. This wasn't surprising. If they wanted to erase someone, the digital trail would be the first to go. Physical records would be harder to completely change. The vault kept backup archives of all personnel files in the administrative wing, partly for security, partly because the old director never trusted computers. Those files needed physical access, not just a login. I waited until my lunch break before heading to the archives. The room wasn't actively monitored. Few people ever needed to look at paper files anymore. But my badge swipe would still be recorded. If anyone checked, I could claim I was researching old mapping techniques. The archive smelled of paper and dust. Filing cabinets lined the room from floor to ceiling, organized by department and year. I went directly to Research Personnel, 2018, the year Caldwell had mentioned for Reardon's disappearance. The cabinet wasn't locked. I pulled open the drawer labeled QZ and looked through the folders. Nothing under T, no Reardon Thorn. They'd been thorough, but maybe not thorough enough. I moved to the cabinet with facility incident reports. If Reardon had vanished during a power outage, as Caldwell claimed, there would be records of the event itself, even if his name had been removed. The incident report section was more promising. I found a file labeled Critical Systems Failure. March 12, 2018. Inside was a detailed report of a complete power outage that had affected the entire facility for 6 hours and 23 minutes. According to the report, backup generators hadn't turned on properly. Security systems, including cameras and checkpoints, had gone offline. The stone's containment field had stayed active on its own power source, but monitoring equipment had shut down. The timing seemed too convenient. A 6-hour window where no one could track movement through the facility. Perfect conditions for someone to vanish or escape. I took pictures of the report with my personal tablet and kept looking. In the maintenance logs, I found work orders from the week after the outage. Teams had replaced damaged equipment and fixed security systems throughout the facility. One entry caught my attention. Residential quarter E17. Replace damaged ceiling panel and repair adjacent ventilation access. I knew the residential layout well. E17 would be in the eastern wing, where junior researchers lived. If that had been Reardon's room, the repair work might have been done after he was already gone. I put the files back in their places, making sure to leave everything as I'd found it, and headed back to my workstation. The medication was making me feel slow and tired. I worked mechanically through the afternoon, counting the minutes until my shift ended. That evening, instead of going straight to my room, I took a detour to the eastern residential wing. Each section housed about 40 researchers in identical small rooms. Most would be at dinner or evening activities, giving me a short window to look around without attracting attention. I found room E17 easily enough. The door was unlocked normal for empty rooms. Inside, the space had been cleared of personal belongings. A bare mattress sat on the bed frame. The desk was empty except for a standard terminal. The closet had only a few spare hangers. The room looked like every other empty room in the facility. I closed the door behind me and looked at the ceiling, checking for the panel mentioned in the maintenance log. The standard ceiling in these rooms had white acoustic tiles and a metal grid. One panel directly above the bed looked slightly different from the others, newer, with less yellowing around the edges. I pulled a chair from the desk and stood on it. The panel lifted easily, revealing the dark space above. I ran my hand along the inside of the opening, feeling nothing but dust. Stretching higher, I reached farther into the ceiling space. My fingers touched something solid, pushed back into the corner where the ceiling met the wall. Something that didn't feel like part of the ventilation system. I grabbed it and pulled it toward me. A book fell into my hand, a leather-bound journal, worn and dusty. I quickly put back the ceiling panel and stepped down from the chair. The journal had no name on its cover. I sat on the bare mattress and opened it to the first page. Day 872 at the deep. The whispers started 3 days ago. I nearly dropped the book. This was it. Reardon Thorne's journal. I flipped through the first few pages, recognizing my own experiences reflected back at me through someone else's words. Day 875. The whispers are getting louder. I can almost make out words now. Dr. Reed prescribed something for what she calls auditory hallucinations, but I know what I'm hearing is real. Day 877. I saw myself on the security footage today. Except it wasn't me, not exactly. He looked tired, older somehow. He stared directly into the camera as if he knew I would be watching. Day 880. Found a note at my station this morning. Just 4 words. They are lying to you. The handwriting is mine, but I didn't write it. Each entry mirrored what had happened to me almost exactly. The progression was the same. Whispers, sightings, messages, the feeling that the facility itself was changing. I read faster. On day 883, Reardon's entries took a new turn. I accessed the restricted files today. What they're hiding changes everything. The stone isn't just an artifact. It's a doorway. It exists in multiple realities at once, occupying the same physical space across different timelines. The research team knows this. They've recorded hundreds of timeline breaches over the past decade, people appearing who shouldn't be here, equipment showing impossible readings, reality itself bending around the stone, and I'm not the first to hear the whispers. Keller and Matthews both reported the same experiences before they vanished. The official story is that they transferred out, but the truth is much stranger. I paused, remembering what Caldwell had told me. 3 others before me, Keller, Matthews, and Reardon himself. All gone without a trace. The next entry sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Day 885. I found Matthews today, not in our reality, in another one bleeding through. He looked right at me in the corridor. Tried to speak, but no sound came out. Security walked right through him like he wasn't there. In his reality, he's still at the deep, but something's wrong. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. He looked like he was running from something. I think I understand now. The stone isn't communicating, it's reaching across timelines. The whispers are voices from other realities where the deep exists. Sometimes those realities overlap with ours, creating the mirrors, the impossible messages. Day 887, I saw myself again today. Not on camera, in person. We stood face to face in the research wing. He told me I need to leave before the convergence. Said that in his timeline they couldn't stop it and everyone at the deep died. Day 890. I've been mapping the security system. There's a way out during supply deliveries. A brief window when the loading bay is connected to the outside world. I've been saving my medication, pretending to take it but storing it instead. Tomorrow night, when the rotorcraft brings the monthly supplies, I'm going to create a distraction, using the pills to trigger a false medical emergency. In the confusion, I can reach the loading bay. If anyone finds this journal, know that the stone is more dangerous than they're admitting. It's breaking down walls between realities, and in some of those realities, something terrible has already happened here. That was the final entry. Reardon Thorne had planned his escape 5 years ago during a supply delivery. Had he succeeded? The power outage happened the very next day. Was that his distraction, or had something else gone wrong? I checked the date on the last entry. March 11th, 2018. The power outage occurred on March 12th. The timing lined up exactly. I put the journal into my jumpsuit pocket and returned the chair to its original position. As I was about to leave, something else caught my attention. A small scratch mark on the wall near the bed. Looking closer, I saw it wasn't random damage but a deliberately carved set of numbers. 22,481. A code of some kind. I memorized the numbers and left room E17, making sure the door closed properly behind me back in my own quarters. I examined the journal more carefully. Beyond the written entries, Reardon had included detailed drawings, sketches of the stone showing subtle changes in its surface that official scans had never detected. He'd mapped what he called thin spots, where reality seemed weaker around the artifact. Most importantly, he documented the facility's shipment schedule. According to his notes, supply deliveries came on the second Tuesday of each month between 22/0 and 23/0. I checked my facility calendar. Tomorrow was the second Tuesday of the month. The data Chip Caldwell had given me was still hidden beneath my desk drawer. I remembered the numbers from Reardon's wall, 22,481. On a hunch, I accessed my terminal settings and changed the input protocol from current standard to version 2.24.81, an older system that might be compatible with Caldwell's chip. The terminal accepted the protocol change. I inserted the chip into the port, holding my breath. The screen flickered, then displayed a single file, Convergence Theory PDF. I opened it to find a research paper written by Dr. Aris Caldwell himself, dated nearly 20 years earlier. The document had been marked, classified, and removed from all official databases. Caldwell's paper proposed that the Nexus Stone wasn't unique to our reality. It existed simultaneously across multiple timelines, serving as an anchor point where different versions of reality could potentially intersect. He theorized that with enough energy, these convergence points could create permanent connections between timelines. The most disturbing section came near the end. If the theories outlined above prove correct, the Nexus Stone represents both unprecedented scientific opportunity and existential risk. A controlled convergence could allow information exchange between realities, advancing our knowledge by centuries. An uncontrolled convergence, however, would likely cause catastrophic reality degradation as multiple timelines attempt to occupy the same spacetime coordinates. Such an event could theoretically destroy all connected realities. Caldwell had written this 20 years ago, and the research had been buried. Yet here we were, with reality already showing signs of breaking down, exactly as he predicted. I stayed up late into the night, reading Reardon's journal and Caldwell's paper over and over, trying to find anything that might help me understand what was happening. The whispers kept going in my head, sometimes getting almost clear before fading away again. Around 2:00, I was too tired to fight sleep anymore. I hid the journal and chip, and lay down without changing out of my jumpsuit. I fell asleep fast but didn't rest well. I dreamed I was standing in front of the stone as it started to crack. Light poured from the fissures, and through them I could see countless versions of the deep. Some destroyed, some transformed, some teeming with bizarre alien machinery. Different versions of me were in these other facilities, some desperately trying to mend the breaks, others pulling at the very fabric of the walls between worlds. I woke suddenly at 3:17, the time on my bedside display. Something had woken me, not the whispers but a new sound, a distant, high-pitched tone that pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. Alarms. I sat up, wide awake despite my medication and lack of sleep. The facility had different alarm sounds for different emergencies. This particular sound meant a security breach. My terminal flashed with a message for everyone. Attention all personnel. Security Protocol Alpha in effect. Remain in quarters. This is not a drill, Protocol Alpha. Not just someone where they shouldn't be, but a real threat to the facility or the stone. Everyone had to stay put until security cleared each area. I tried my door handle. Locked, as expected. During Protocol Alpha, only security teams could use the hallways. Through the walls, I could hear movement in the rooms next to mine, other researchers, probably just as confused. The facility PA system crackled. Then Commander Kane spoke, his voice tense but controlled. Attention all personnel. We have an unauthorized access situation in research sector. See, security teams are responding. All personnel must remain in designated safe areas until further notice. Any individual found in corridors without proper authorization will be detained immediately. Research Sector C, where the Nexus Stone was housed. Dread clenched my gut. Someone or something had accessed the most heavily guarded area of the deep. The whispers in my head suddenly got louder, becoming almost deafening. Dozens of voices speaking urgently, all at once, creating a chaos of sound that made it hard to think. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to block out the noise. Then, as suddenly as they had gotten louder, the whispers fell into perfect unison. Every voice speaking the exact same words at the exact same time. Finally clear. Understandable. It's happening. The convergence has begun. I needed to see what was happening. The alarms kept going off as I paced in my locked room. I couldn't just sit and wait while whatever convergence the whispers warned about was starting. I tried my door again. No give. The locks had activated with the alarms. Security would be too busy dealing with the breach to worry about a researcher breaking quarantine, but I still needed to get out. Looking around my small room, I thought about what to do. The ventilation system was too small. The walls were solid. But the ceiling, I looked up. Remembering Reardon Thorne's room and the access panel, I dragged my desk chair to the center of the room and climbed up. The ceiling panels in my quarters were just like those in E17. I pushed upward and the panel moved. It opened up, revealing the dark maintenance space above. I pulled myself up. The space between the ceiling and the next floor was tight, barely 18 inches high, but I could squeeze through. Dust got all over my uniform as I put the panel back in place behind me. The whispers in my head grew louder, more urgent. I moved through the darkness, feeling my way and remembering the facility layout. The ceiling space should connect throughout this section of living quarters. If I could reach the main corridor access point, I might be able to drop down outside the locked areas. It took longer than I expected. Twice, I almost went the wrong way. The space grew uncomfortably warm, and the dust made it hard to breathe. After what felt like forever, I saw a faint light ahead, an access hatch used by maintenance workers. I reached the hatch and looked through its small window. The corridor below was empty, bathed in the pulsating red emergency lights. I turned the manual release and pushed the hatch open, dropping down into the hallway. The alarms were deafening here, sharp and urgent. The automated message kept repeating, Remember in quarters, Protocol Alpha in effect. I ignored the warning and started moving. The research wing was 3 sectors away, and I needed to go through multiple security checkpoints that normally required badge access. But during an emergency, certain systems switched to mechanical override so emergency teams could move freely. I hoped those systems were active. The first checkpoint door opened with a hard push, its electronic lock deactivated. The facility felt strangely empty as I moved through corridors that should have had security guards. Whatever was happening at the stone had drawn all available staff there. As I got closer to the research wing, I heard voices. Lots of them. Not the whispers in my head, but actual people. I slowed down, approaching the final set of doors carefully. The research floor opened up before me, a scene of controlled chaos. Dozens of researchers and security personnel had gathered on the observation deck that overlooked the stone's chamber. Some were shouting orders, others checking equipment that had been quickly set up. The normal lights had been replaced by flashing red emergency lights. I stayed against a wall, trying not to be noticed, as I moved toward the observation windows. No one paid attention to me. They were all focused on what was happening below. When I reached the edge of the deck and looked down, I almost forgot to breathe. The Nexus stone had changed. Its perfectly smooth surface now had thin, glowing lines like cracks in black glass. These lines pulsed with bright white light that seemed to push outward against the stone's surface. The usual soft thrum had changed into a deafening tone that made the air vibrate. Thorn. A hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. Dr. Aris Caldwell stood before me, his usual neat appearance disheveled. His glasses sat crookedly on his nose, and his lab coat was buttoned incorrectly. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no real admonishment in his voice, only urgency. "But since you are, come with me." He pulled me toward a monitoring station set up at the far end of the deck. Screens displayed readings I didn't recognize, energy patterns and waveforms that fluctuated wildly. "It's opening," Caldwell said, his voice hushed despite the noise around us. "For the first time since we found it, the stone is actually opening." "Opening to what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "To everywhere." Caldwell gestured at one of the screens. "These readings suggest space-time distortions extending outward from the stone, not just small breaches like before. Full-scale tears in reality." Below us, more security personnel entered the chamber, taking positions around the stone. They carried weapons. Not the standard sidearms, but heavier tactical equipment I'd never seen. Silas Blackwood stood at the center of the observation deck, issuing orders through a communication system, his voice amplified over the chaos. "I want containment field strength doubled. Get the dampening system online. No one approaches within 20 meters of the artifact." He turned to Commander Kane beside him. "If anyone tries to breach the perimeter, you are authorized to use lethal force. We cannot allow interaction with the stone during an active phase." Kane nodded grimly and relayed the order to his teams below. "This is what you predicted," I said to Caldwell, remembering his paper. "The convergence." Caldwell looked surprised. "You saw my paper, how did you?" He stopped himself. "The data chip, you found a compatible system." Reardon Thorne's access code helped. Caldwell's eyebrows shot up. "You found Reardon's." "Never mind. That's not important now. What matters is what's happening to the stone. Your paper said a convergence could destroy connected realities. Is that what we're facing?" "It's worse than I predicted." Caldwell pointed to another screen showing energy readings. "The stone isn't just creating temporary breaches anymore. It's establishing permanent connections between timelines. If it fully activates, the barriers between realities could collapse entirely." The whispers in my head suddenly intensified, becoming a chorus of urgent voices, all trying to speak at once. I winced at the noise, pressing my hands against my temples. The voices. Caldwell noticed my discomfort. "They're getting louder, aren't they?" I nodded, unable to speak through the cacophony. "It's the other timelines," Caldwell explained. "As the walls between realities thin, You're hearing more versions of this moment happening simultaneously. I forced myself to focus past the noise, looking back down at the stone chamber. I looked around at all the personnel, researchers taking readings, security maintaining the perimeter, technical staff adjusting equipment. That's when I saw him. Moving against the flow of people, a figure in a navy jumpsuit made his way steadily toward the stone. From above I could see the top of his head. Brown hair, flecked with gray, cut short in a familiar style. It was me. Another version of me. This wasn't the same mirror who had left the warnings. That version had looked haggard, desperate. This one moved with purpose and confidence, his posture straight and determined. Security personnel seemed not to notice him as he slipped between them, closing the distance to the stone meter by meter. Aris, I grabbed his arm, pointing. Look down there. Caldwell followed my gesture, his eyes widening behind his glasses. Is that you? Yes, but that's not the same mirror who left me warnings. I watched as my counterpart navigated around a security team. This is someone else. Another timeline bleeding through, Caldwell muttered. But he seems solid, physical. He's actually here, not just an apparition. The mirror paused like he could tell someone was watching him. He looked up right at the observation deck. Our eyes met across the distance. I felt a chill. His face was mine, but I couldn't quite read his expression, determined but with something cold about it. This wasn't a version of me trying to help or warn. This was someone with his own plans, and he was heading straight for the stone. He's going to breach the perimeter, I said. I need to stop him. Before Caldwell could respond, I was moving, pushing through the crowd toward the stairs that led down to the chamber. Behind me, I heard Caldwell calling my name, but I didn't stop. I ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time. The security checkpoint at the bottom would normally prevent unauthorized access to the chamber level. But in the confusion, a researcher had propped the door open with an equipment case to allow teams to move through quickly. The chamber level was even more chaotic than the observation deck. The stone was pulsing with light. The air felt different, like it was filled with raw energy. I looked around for my mirror, spotting him on the far side. He had reached the security perimeter and was waiting, watching the patrol patterns of the guards. I pushed through the crowds, keeping my head down to avoid drawing attention. Security was focused on the stone and the perimeter, not on individual researchers moving through the background. My mirror made his move, timing it perfectly between guard rotations. He slipped past the 20-meter boundary marker, now in the restricted zone around the stone. I changed direction, circling around to intercept him from the side. The whispers in my head had become a roar, but I forced myself to focus on the physical world around me. The mirror reached a control panel near the stone's support structure. His hands moved over the interface with practiced ease, entering commands I couldn't see. I was 10 meters away when he sensed me coming. He turned, my eyes meeting mine again. For a moment we both froze, like mirror images facing each other in the chaos. Then he ran. I chased after him, following as he moved away from the stone and toward a maintenance access door. He slammed through it, and I followed seconds later. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit and narrow, branching into a maze of service tunnels that ran throughout the facility. The alarms were muffled here, with red emergency lights creating pools of light between dark areas. I could hear his footsteps ahead, bouncing off the metal walls. The corridor forked, and I hesitated for a split second before choosing the right path. The whispers guided me, suddenly all pointing me toward him. The corridor ended in a small junction room, filled with pipes and electrical conduits. My mirror stood at the far end, his back against the wall. He was trapped. "Who are you?" I demanded, staying near the doorway to block his escape. He smiled, a strange expression to see on my own face. "I'm you, Caleb. Just not your version of you." His voice was mine, but the tone was slightly different, more confident, with an edge I didn't recognize in myself. "What were you doing at the control panel?" I asked, taking a cautious step forward. "Finishing what we started long ago." He gestured vaguely toward where the stone would be. The walls. The convergence is happening whether you try to stop it or not. My mirror, the other one who left me warnings. He told me to leave, I said. He was trying to help me, the trapped mirror laughed. Is that what you think? He wasn't trying to help you, he was trying to remove you as an obstacle. I stopped my advance. What do you mean? Think about it, Caleb. He crossed his arms, mirroring a gesture I often made when explaining something. There are countless versions of us across countless timelines. In some of them, we work to open the doorway. In others, we try to keep it closed. The whispers in my head suddenly fell silent, as if listening to our conversation. The stone, my mirror continued, isn't just an artifact, it's a node, an anchor point that exists in every connected reality. Its creators placed these nodes throughout the multiverse, waiting for the right conditions to activate them. Its creators, I asked. You know who made it, not who. What? His eyes gleamed in the red emergency lighting. They exist outside our concept of reality, beings who experience all possible timelines simultaneously. They created the nodes as doorways, ways to enter linear reality. I thought back to Caldwell's paper, the warnings about catastrophic reality degradation if multiple timelines converged. You're helping them, I realized. You're trying to open the doorway, he nodded. In my timeline, I've been working with them for years. They showed me possibilities beyond anything you can imagine. And the cost? I asked. Eris Caldwell's research suggests a full convergence could destroy connected realities. Caldwell doesn't understand. It's not destruction, it's transformation. My mirror took a step toward me. Yes, this version of reality will end, but something new will take its place, something better. Who are you to make that decision for everyone? I felt anger rising in me. For Alara, for every person in this facility, for the entire world. At Alara's name, something flickered across his face. A brief shadow of doubt. She's alive in my timeline, he said quietly. But different. They all are. Once you see the full picture, you understand that individual lives are just variations on a theme. What matters is the pattern, not the individual notes. That's not how humanity works, I argued. We're not just patterns. Each life matters. He shook his head, looking sorry for me. That's such a limited perspective, but I wouldn't expect you to understand. Your timeline has only experienced the stone as a passive artifact. In mine, it's been communicating for years. I suddenly got it. The whispers, they're not just from other timelines breaking through. They're deliberate communications from the creators. Yes, they speak to receptive versions of us across all timelines. Some listen. Some, like your warning mirror, fight against it. It's all part of the selection process. Selection for what? To see which version of Caleb Thorne will help open the door, and which will try to keep it closed. He spread his arms wide. A cosmic experiment with countless iterations, all happening simultaneously. The facility rumbled around us, the walls vibrating. The stone's energy was growing stronger. It's already started, my mirror said. The program I initiated is amplifying the stone's natural resonance. The convergence will reach critical mass within hours. How do I stop it? I demanded. He laughed again. You don't. That's what your warning mirror didn't understand. For every version of us trying to prevent the convergence, there's another working to ensure it happens. The creators made sure the odds were perfectly balanced. Another tremor, stronger this time, shook the room. A pipe above us burst, releasing a cloud of steam. I need to get back, my mirror said, moving as if to leave. I stepped into his path. I'm not letting you go. You don't have a choice. His hand moved to his pocket, pulling out a small device I didn't recognize. In approximately 4 minutes, the reality boundaries near the stone will become permeable enough for me to return to my own timeline. My work here is done. I'll alert security. They'll shut down whatever program you started. They can't. It's already integrated with the stone's own processes. He checked the device in his hand. Besides, you won't be alerting anyone. He moved with surprising speed, lunging forward and slamming me against the wall. I fought back, wrestling with my mirror in the narrow space. It was weird, like fighting myself. each of us knowing what the other would do next. We crashed into the pipes lining the walls. Steam and liquid sprayed around us as connections broke. The floor got slippery and dangerous. My mirror had the advantage. He was clearly ready for this fight. As we struggled, he pushed me toward the broken section of piping. "Nothing personal," he grunted as he gave a final shove. "Just ensuring the timeline plays out correctly." I lost my footing on the wet floor and fell backward, my head hitting something hard on the wall. A searing pain. My vision blurred. As my sight faded, I watched my mirror fix his jumpsuit and look at the device again. He looked down at me with what seemed like almost regret. "If it helps," he said, "in the majority of timelines where the convergence succeeds, we survive. Some version of us always makes it through." I tried to respond, to get up, but I couldn't move. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was my mirror walking calmly out of the room, leaving me alone as the facility shook around us. The whispers came back as everything went dark. Hundreds of voices speaking together. "Choose your side. The door is opening." My head throbbed like someone had taken a hammer to my skull. I touched the back of my head. My fingers came away sticky with blood. For several minutes I lay on the wet maintenance room floor, trying to piece together what had happened. My mirror, the fight, the stone changing. The whispers had grown into a constant roar in my mind, no longer at the edges of my consciousness, but front and center, demanding attention. I pushed myself upright, fighting waves of nausea and dizziness. The floor beneath me trembled continuously now, small vibrations broken up by stronger jolts that made the pipes rattle. "Choose your side," the voices repeated, a mantra that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the facility's emergency lights. I staggered to my feet, using the wall for support. I needed to get back to the stone chamber. Whatever my mirror had done there might still be time to stop it. The maintenance corridor spun around me as I took my first unsteady steps toward the exit. When I reached the door and pushed it open, I found myself looking not at the corridor I'd entered from, but at an unfamiliar room filled with equipment I didn't recognize. Massive generators buzzed, connected to a central platform where a scaled-down version of the stone sat, encased in glass. A woman in a white lab coat looked up from a control panel, her eyes widening at my appearance. "Dr. Thorne, you're supposed to be in Sector 4 for the activation sequence," she said. I backed away, pulling the door closed. This wasn't right. This wasn't any part of the deep I recognized. I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. When I finally got enough courage to open the door again, the strange room was gone, replaced by the correct corridor leading back to the stone chamber. The tremors were stronger now, making it hard to walk straight. As I moved through the corridor, the walls seemed to change, becoming see-through in spots. Through these clear sections, I could see other spaces. Labs with different equipment, military sleeping quarters, even what looked like prison cells. Other timelines, I realized. Other versions of the deep, leaking into our reality. The corridor ahead of me got super long, then suddenly short again. A door showed up on my left where no door should be. It opened as I passed, and I saw a huge open room where workers loaded what looked like weapons onto a conveyor belt. The stone, much bigger in this reality, sat in the middle of the room, its surface covered with detailed markings. I walked faster, ignoring the doors and windows into other deeps that appeared and disappeared around me. The whispers got louder the closer I got to the stone chamber, turning into a storm of competing voices. The final security door leading to the chamber wouldn't open. When I pressed my badge, the electronic system was breaking down as reality became unreliable. I stuck my fingers into the small gap between the doors and pulled, pushing hard against the mechanism until something broke with a metallic noise. The chamber beyond was barely recognizable. The stone now floated several feet above its container, the cracks in its surface wider and more numerous, pouring bright white light into the room. The air looked wavy around it, and in those distortions I could see pieces of other places, other times. Most of the security staff had left, but a small group of researchers stayed, gathered around a modified control station at the far end of the room. I saw Leo Vance there, telling two technicians what to do as they moved cables from a damaged panel. I made my way across the chamber, keeping my distance from the floating stone. The light coming from it bent in weird ways that hurt to look at directly. "Thorn," Leo called out when he saw me approach. His face showed equal parts relief and suspicion. "Where have you been? We thought you were evacuating with the others." "I ran into some trouble," I said, touching the back of my head where the blood was beginning to dry. "What's happening? What did my mirror do?" Leo's expression got darker. "You saw him too. Security footage caught someone who looked like you accessing the primary containment controls. He initiated a feedback cascade in the dampening field. Instead of containing the stone's energy, it's amplifying it." The other researchers looked up when I mentioned my mirror. They all looked scared and tired. "The stone is awakening," said a woman I recognized as Dr. Kaminsky from theoretical physics. She pointed to a monitor showing energy readings that spiked and dipped in patterns too regular to be random. "It's not just emitting energy, it's broadcasting a signal across multiple dimensions, like a beacon." "A beacon for what?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew from what my mirror had told me. "For them," Leo said simply. He nodded toward another monitor showing thermal imaging of the chamber. In the feed, strange shapes moved around the stone, forms that weren't visible to the naked eye but registered on the infrared spectrum. They weren't human shapes. The stone was never just an artifact, Dr. Kaminsky continued. It's a doorway, and now it's opening. Another violent tremor shook the room. A section of wall on the far side just disappeared, showing a jungle that definitely wasn't part of our building. Through the gap, I saw weird structures among the trees, shapes that bent in ways that didn't make any sense. "The convergence is causing multiple realities to merge," Leo explained, his voice tight with controlled panic. "If we can't stop it, our universe will be permanently damaged. The laws of physics will break down, as competing realities try to occupy the same space." Everything my mirror had said came rushing back. The creators existing outside our concept of reality, the stone as a doorway, the selection process to see which version of me would help open the door. "It wasn't trying to help me," I said aloud, the realization finally clicking into place. "What?" Leo looked confused. "My mirror. The first one, the one who left me warnings to leave." I shook my head, understanding the truth at last. He wasn't trying to save me. He wanted to remove me as an obstacle to the stone's awakening. "What are you talking about, Thorn?" Leo grabbed my arm. "Focus, we need solutions, not conspiracy theories." I pulled away from his grip. "Reardon Thorn's journal, I found it. He documented everything. The whispers, the mirrors, the facility changes. But more importantly, he mapped what he called thin spots around the stone." Leo looked shocked. "Reardon, you found his journal, in his quarters. He hid it in the ceiling before he disappeared." I turned to the nearest terminal. "I need to access my files." I photographed his schematics. Dr. Kaminsky moved over so I could log in. My credentials still worked, even though system problems were causing issues all over the facility. I pulled up the pictures I'd taken of Reardon's journal pages and put them on the main screen. "Here." I pointed to Reardon's detailed drawings of the stone. He identified points where reality seemed weaker around the artifact. According to his notes, these points aren't random. They form a pattern, like circuit nodes. Leo studied the images, his scientific training overcoming his distrust of me. "These correspond with the energy emission points we've recorded. But what does that tell us?" "It tells us how to close the door," I said. "Look at his notes here. Reardon theorized that the stone responds to specific electromagnetic frequencies. If it's broadcasting a signal now, we might be able to broadcast one back, create a feedback loop." "That could work," Dr. Kaminsky said, excitement creeping into her voice. "Instead of trying to suppress the stone's power, which we've been failing at, we redirect it back on itself. Force the artifact to close itself." Leo completed the thought, already turning to the controls. We'll need to reconfigure the containment field emitters. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. The remaining technicians worked to rewire the containment systems based on our makeshift plan, while Dr. Kaminsky figured out the exact frequencies needed to match the stone's emissions. I looked over Reardon's diagrams to find the best spots for our modified emitters. All around us, reality kept mixing together. The opening to the jungle got bigger, and new holes showed up. One with an underwater version of the facility, another showing a version that looked like it was made from one big rock. Shadowy people walked through our space, researchers and security staff from other timelines who couldn't see us, just like we couldn't quite see them. The whispers in my head changed their message. Close the door and all possibilities end. Keep it open and become more. I ignored them and stayed focused. Leo and I worked together, our earlier problems forgotten because of the danger. He didn't ask how I knew about Reardon or why I understood what was happening. There wasn't time. As we finished the modifications, another strong shake hit the facility. Ceiling panels fell down around us and the floor cracked in places. Warning alarms I'd never heard before started blaring throughout the room. Structural integrity failing, an automated voice announced. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Repeat, all personnel must evacuate immediately. Leo looked up from his work, his face grim. That's it. We've got maybe 20 minutes before this whole place comes down around us. The rotorcraft, Dr. Kaminsky said. The supply delivery, it should still be at the landing pad. We can use it to evacuate. Leo nodded. But someone needs to stay to activate the feedback loop. The timing has to be precise, or it won't work. Everyone in the small group exchanged looks. No one spoke the obvious. Whoever stayed would likely not make it out. The feedback loop would need constant adjustment as the stone's emissions changed, and the building was falling apart. I'll do it, I said, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. I'll stay. Leo started to protest, but I cut him off. I've spent 14 years studying this thing. I understand Reardon's notes better than anyone, and it's me the stone has been trying to communicate with. I gestured around us. Whatever is happening involves me, multiple versions of me. It makes sense that I should be the one to finish this. Dr. Kaminsky touched my arm briefly. Are you sure? I wasn't, not really, but I nodded anyway. Get everyone else out. I'll maintain the feedback loop as long as I can. There wasn't time for long goodbyes. The remaining team gathered what essential data they could while I familiarized myself with the control setup. Leo was the last to leave. The emitters will need constant recalibration, he explained hurriedly. The stone will try to change frequencies to break the loop. You'll need to match it each time. I understand. He handed me a small radio. We'll maintain contact as long as possible. Once you're sure the feedback loop is stable, get to the northern emergency exit. It's the most structurally sound part of the facility. If you can reach it, we'll try to come back for you. We both knew that was unlikely, but I appreciated the gesture. Leo hesitated a moment longer, then extended his hand. I shook it. Good luck, Thorne, he said simply, then turned and jogged toward the exit. Alone in the control room, I sat down in the chair and looked at the monitors. The modified containment field was ready. All I needed to do was activate it at the exact moment when the stone's emissions hit their peak. On the screens in front of me, the energy readings kept going up. The stone in the chamber below was floating in the air, turning slowly, its cracks getting wider and showing a blinding light inside. The whispers in my head got louder. Thousands of voices from countless timelines, all talking at once. I put my hands over the activation controls, watching the energy curve go up toward its highest point. When it hit the calculated threshold, I turned on the system. It worked right away. The modified emitters fired, making visible beams of energy that hit the stone at the exact points Reardon had found. The light coming from the cracks suddenly changed direction, going back into the artifact instead of out. The stone shook, spinning faster. Feedback loop established, announced the system. Field integrity at 87% and holding. I breathed out slowly. It was working. The stone's emissions were being sent back into itself, forcing the doorway to close. On the security monitors that still worked, I could see the reality breaches around the facility beginning to seal themselves, the glimpses of other timelines fading. The radio made a crackling sound. Leo's voice. "Thorn status report. Feedback loop is stable," I replied. "The breaches are closing." "Confirmed," Leo said. "We're seeing the effect throughout the facility. The stone's energy signature is decreasing." A pause. "The rotorcraft is loaded. We can hold another 5 minutes max." "Go." "No," I said. "I need to stay and maintain the loop. If it fails before the process completes—" I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what would happen. "Understood," Leo said after a long moment. "Good luck, Caleb." The radio went quiet. I looked back at the monitors, tweaking the field settings as the stone's output changed. Whenever it tried to switch frequency, I adjusted to keep the feedback loop going. The whole facility kept shaking around me. Parts of the ceiling had fallen in the room below, but the stone still hung above all the damage, its light getting dimmer as the cracks on its surface slowly closed up. While I worked, I spotted security screens I hadn't seen before. They showed different areas of the deep, but what shocked me was that each screen showed a different version of me. In one, I was running to the rotorcraft pad with the others. In another, I stood right in front of the stone, my arms out like I was embracing it. A third showed me in Silas Blackwood's office, calmly watching the chaos through the windows while Blackwood begged me about something. Dozens of screens, dozens of Caleb Thorns, all making different choices at this critical moment. I finally got what my mirror meant. The creators were testing every possible version of me in different timelines. Which one would help open the door? Which would try to close it? Which would run? Which would stay? Which would fight? As I watched these other versions of myself, the whispers turned into one clear voice that seemed to speak from all around me. "You have chosen." The stone's rotation slowed. The cracks in its surface narrowed to thin lines, then to hairline fractures, and finally disappeared. The light dimmed until the artifact was dark and quiet in the air, back to the smooth, featureless shape I'd studied for 14 years. I sat alone in the control room, surrounded by blinking monitors showing dozens of versions of myself throughout the facility, each dealing with the results of their choices. Outside, I heard the distant sound of rotorcraft engines as Leo and the others left. The feedback loop stayed steady, with readings showing the stone going back to its inactive state. I looked at the structural integrity warnings. The immediate danger was passing, but the facility was too damaged to stay standing. I had about an hour before the remaining supports failed, just enough time to reach the northern emergency exit if I left soon. But I stayed seated, watching the monitors. The alternate versions of myself were disappearing one by one as the timeline breaches closed. Reality was becoming stable, with choices becoming permanent. Soon, only my timeline would remain. I looked down at the stone, now back in its cradle. It was quiet. In my mind, for the first time in days, the whispers were gone. The voices silent. I'd made my choice. The lights in the control room blinked, then became steady. I turned back to the instruments, checking the final stages of the feedback loop as the facility groaned around me. Then, from the silence, a voice, clearer than any whisper, resonated deep within my skull. Not a chorus, not a cacophony, a single, resonant, all-knowing voice. It was not Alara, it was not my mirror. It was something else, something ancient, something profound, and it was speaking only to me. "Welcome, chosen variant, your trial is complete. Your purpose begins." The hum of the Nexus stone, which had been a constant in my life for so long, had returned. Only now it felt different. It was no longer an external drone. It was inside me, a part of me. The other Calebs on the monitors flickered, not dissolving, but integrating, their light absorbed, their consciousnesses a vast, silent echo within the hum. And I knew. I had not saved my world. I had merely ensured its stability and my own for the true convergence. The silence was not peace. It was the quiet of a mind now connected, now controlled. My choice had not been freedom. It had been selection, and my purpose, whatever it was, had just begun. Want more chilling stories like this? Follow for more.